welcome to episode 9, I believe, the John Daigle Show, as it becomes August 1st, and we continue going wherever the wind takes us, as football is clearly at the top of mind. Pertinent news happening between injuries and everything else over the weekend, and I have already screwed up prep for the show. I went out, got a few ingredients this morning at the market, thinking I was going to initially teach you how to make a grapefruit Paloma, and then I come back and I have no tequila left in the drawer from over the weekend. So show prep, the first time I've got it wrong so far. We will adjust. We will get better. It's still a great day. So let's go ahead and just get right into what I promised at the top. Paloma combination coming Thursday morning instead, since I have to go shopping again. But I want to get into rankings because we've seen a lot of changes this week that are more pertinent for best ball right now, since not a lot of people are drafting redraft leagues. We're seeing some of those changes happen in ongoing redraft leagues, the few happening. Main event FFPC drafts happening right now, $1,900 entries. We have one for free to read and follow along with, an oral diary on the site right now between myself, Connor Allen, and Ryan Noonan. We started at 108. That's where we're picking from. 6-hour slow clock. And right now we have AJ Brown and Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, who we didn't think would come back to us. That was shocking. A player I have at the same tier, and we'll get there, but at the same tier as Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, among a couple others. So interesting to go read that for free on the site if you want to check that out. I will also be participating in Friday's first live $1,900 main event. A team completely on my own. Yes, historical. It is injury season. A team completely on my own on Friday. It will not be streamed. This one we're going to keep to ourselves, but I will have a review of how I'm handling my pick for a video on our YouTube channel on Monday morning. For the time being, though, let's get to Jonathan Taylor, because my tiers on the site are becoming more cutthroat, more diligent as we ease closer towards September. For best ball, they were always kept broad because in terms of expanding our portfolio, when you reach a handful of players, these guys are the same. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I have rankings. Yes, that's my job to rank these players. But even JJ Zacharyson had mentioned the group of receivers that are all the same players. And I can point out, as you should be able to as well when you start drafting a lot, if you can't point out the tier of quarterbacks that come up that are all the same, from Geno Smith, well, Geno Smith's not even going in that range, from Tua all the way down to Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson. I include Kenny Pickett in that tier as well. But all those guys from QB 9 to 10 through 18, all the same players. Running backs, I'm about to show you the tier that now includes Jonathan Taylor, where everyone's kind of the same player. And then wide receivers, it's massive. I will show you how I have adjusted my wide receiver tier overnight. And tight end, everyone's the same anyways. After the first 4, everyone from Kyle Pitts all the way down to go to 24, go to Hayden Hurst. Everyone's the same player. Who cares? Just take one. But for Jonathan Taylor and running backs, since that's the most recent news, I think that's what's pertinent. And more importantly, it's pertinent because I was already down on Jonathan Taylor. I had him in the same tier as the players I mentioned earlier. Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Ramondre Stevenson. Let's go ahead and get this up for everyone as well. But with this recent news, I did push Jonathan Taylor down one tier. Down to tier 3. Still, in my opinion, rightly ahead of Breece Hall. And then he falls into this line of where I believe players should be going. Joe Mixon doesn't always go at 12. In fact, a lot of the times it's Najee Harris. It has become Jahmyr Gibbs slowly overnight. Joe Mixon should be there. He's not there. I think that's one of the more incorrect ADPs happening right now. Tony Pollard, to a more emphasized extent because Tony Pollard should be going at the end of the first round. He still goes in the middle to end of the second round. It's wrong. It's just a wrong ADP. Keep taking advantage of that. But all these guys, we get here, and if I know I'm supposed to draft based on my tiers, one of these players, however you want to rank them, and yes, I include Bijan with Tony Pollard, same as with Austin Eckler, since they're all toss-ups. If someone wanted to tell me they would stick tier 3 right here and put Eckler and Bijan in a tier of their own, I'm listening. But I do think Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb can all outscore Bijan quite easily, especially in redraft. So I like to have that tier the same and just remind myself I need to get one of these guys because there's a drop-off after that. Jonathan Taylor was previously here, and he was previously lower. He was RB9, so he didn't move in ranking. I just had to drop him down basically half a round, knowing that I should be taking the wide receivers there instead. And I had to drop him down and had him ranked RB9 because we were still worried about his target share from a rookie and mobile quarterback. And yes, Blake, the running back ambiguity is definitely more impactful right now because we're seeing the players lose their leverage because of the market. It's capitalism is what it really is. We won't get into capitalism, what it is today, but that's what's happening to the running back market. And so with Jonathan Taylor's deal and going on the non-football injury list because he showed up to practice with a back injury, he's walking around at least via camp reels like he has a back injury. And the NFI, since he's now put on there, if he stays there for the season, for the entire season, he actually loses. I believe it's the full season. Someone in the chat correct me if it's a half a season. But I think I've read up on it enough to know it's the full season. And if he's on the NFI list for a full season, he doesn't become a free agent next year either. He actually just loses a year of his contract, and it tolls over to the next one. So he's still stuck with the same hell franchise that is refusing to both trade and pay him. So it's actually in Jonathan Taylor's incentive, and he has no leverage, whether I support him or not, and I always support the players over the rich elitist owners, greedy owners. Taylor has all the interest in the world to return to the field this year, if only to escape under Jim Irsay's drunk hands. And historical. I'm actually surprised you weren't already subscribed since you're here every Tuesday and Thursday morning for us. I see you every time, but I appreciate you doing it now. Thank you so much for that. And yes, because you are a YouTube subscriber, I believe you do get an emoji of my face, which I'm sorry about that. But Jonathan Taylor, RB9, worried about his target share and really overall touches from a both rookie and rushing quarterback. I also like to refer back to this research that both the great Ben Gretsch of Stealing Signal Substack, if you want to check that out, and of course, JJ Zacharyson, late round newsletter, who was on the show again just last week. If you want to check that out, it's evergreen from Thursday's episode. But they both accidentally got together and began expanding on target shares from mobile quarterbacks. And this is completely free, again, on JJ's newsletter, so I can show it to everyone, because this is what I've basically been leaning on as well, since two smart guys already took care of this research for all of us. And that is that we're looking at RPOs and then wondering how many 20% target share players, like how many players with a threshold target share do RPOs create? And if we see that, then that, okay, an RPO pass attempt of 15% or greater, right, can actually lead to two 20% target share players half the time, then we start asking, okay, where does Jonathan Taylor come into play for that? Because Anthony Richardson is still a mobile quarterback, of course, averaged 55 yards per game over his last 2 years at Florida, We know he's going to rush. But we still don't think that these target shares give us confidence in Taylor's pass catching. This makes us a little more confident in Michael Pittman and, more importantly, Alec Pierce. Especially because Alec Pierce just fits the bill. Like Fantasy Football Garage, also up, and Historical. I know you're always here, so we do appreciate you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for that. But Alec Pierce fits the bill of a player who is actually underutilized, is overlooked in best ball right now. 155 ADP. I would argue guaranteed to start 2 wide sets, since the only other relevant options in that depth chart, Isaiah McKenzie, historically a slot receiver, and day 2 rookie Josh Downs ran 89% of his routes from the slot throughout his career in college. So they're not going to threaten 6'3", 211-pound Alec Pierce from the boundary. But more importantly, remember, in college, Alec Pierce had a 16.8-yard depth of target at 6'3", 211 with a 41-inch vertical. He also deadlifted 675 pounds. All that dude does is be tall and big and run straight downfield. I'm not even sure he knows the full route tree, but I know he's going to play in 2 wide receiver sets because he's an anomaly archetype on that team, and all he does is run downfield and jump for contested catches. And now you combine that with the strongest arm of any quarterback in this year's class. So Alec Pierce, you could easily argue, is just undervalued and overlooked. When we talk about finding the next Zay Jones of fantasy football, right? Zay Jones, remember, half PPR league's underdog last year, had a 175 ADP. And I wasn't on him either, but it starts to make sense. At least I wasn't on him heavily, sprinkling him in. In redrafts, we can't really call it the Zay Jones of fantasy football because I even went back to reference my waiver wire from week 12 last year because that's before the fantasy playoffs around week 14. And so for my waiver wire, I already start looking ahead for players to stash. And I actually had Zay Jones as the top pickup. Shout out to me. But more importantly, I didn't look back to give myself a shout out. I looked back because I also include high stakes top 10 pickups, high stakes being thinner waiver wires because you have 10 to 12 man benches. And Zay Jones was actually a free agent in all the high stakes leagues as well, from $2,000 to $5,000. Zay Jones was available. So you can't really say the Zay Jones of fantasy football for redraft because, again, like a Christian Watson, who was unusable for before week 10, and so players could drop him, and you wouldn't feel bad about it. Same for Rachaad White. You could drop Rachaad White in thinner leagues because who cares? You couldn't use them. Zay Jones was unusable, and then he became usable because we saw that the Jags had a top 5 soft schedule of opposing secondaries coming up for their passing attack to be successful against. But for best ball, these players have to be usable. So if we're finding the next Zay Jones, 175 ADP, 2 wide receiver sets, increasing or developing quarterback, if you want to add that caveat in, Alec Pierce starts to make sense, especially because we don't think these RPOs will go to a running back. Thus, Jonathan Taylor, getting back to that, I had lower than everyone else. And we don't think Jonathan Taylor is one of these target share players because, one, speaking of RPOs, Shane Steichen, head coach of the Colts, obviously, the last 2 years with Jalen Hurts has been top 2 in offenses both years and RPOs utilized. So we think the RPOs are coming for Anthony Richardson and the Colts. Not only that, but if we're using Fantasy Points data, Fantasy Points just launched some new tools for subscribers. And if you look at their first read rate, so the player on an offense that gets the first read, that percentage of the time, no running back is in the top 100 players of getting a first read target. You have to go through back of wide receivers, tight ends, before quarterbacks actually start looking at running backs, obviously, as their first read. So we don't think RPOs will go to running backs whatsoever. Not to say Jonathan Taylor doesn't have pass catching equity. If he's the only option on that team, then sure. Jonathan Taylor will catch passes. It's not like he's bad at it, but he's not going to be the first option. So we worry about his actual upside and target share. Now, let's go back to the tiers, because that's when we start getting back into what we do with Jonathan Taylor. And this right here, in my opinion, is not the dead zone. The Taylor, Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Jahmyr Gibbs. And again, I rank them because it's my job. But if anyone said I'm taking Breece Hall over Taylor, I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs over Mixon and Jacobs, whatever. That's fine. I don't care. I have them in the same tier. I do not have Najee Harris in the same tier. Najee Harris's share of backfield touches, we've already talked about this a couple weeks ago on a show, but his overall share of backfield touches actually went down, and not because of Jaylen Warren. The Steelers added 7.6 running back touches per game to their entire backfield combined after their bye from week 10 on. And in the 8 games that Warren and Harris played together after the bye, when Harris was recovered from his foot injury and Warren only missed 1 game over the second half of the season, Najee Harris's overall touches went up to 21.3 per game. But his share of touches actually decreased 76% in the first half of the season with that foot injury, all the way down to 70% in the second half, healthy. So Najee Harris, in my opinion, as someone who depends on touches solely because he's one of the least explosive players in the NFL. He has 1,276 carries since he graduated high school. That includes Alabama. And only 30 have gone for 20 yards, 2.4%, because he's not explosive. He's a running back who depends on touches. And when we start talking about those players and their ADPs right now, that's when we get into the dead zone. So Jonathan Taylor is looking over the dead zone, but when he falls to this range, mid-third round, I'm assuming that's where he's going to go. I've seen him in a couple drafts still be taken in the back of the second round, and I may even be passing on that. I think I'm only taking him around the mid-third round because I think that's where it's going, and that's not the dead zone. ADPs in this range begins deciding the dead zone. And this is where Alexander Madison especially, Alexander Madison for redraft leagues actually has an overall 46 ADP in Yahoo right now. That's the most egregious and shocking ADP I've ever seen in my life. Imagine using your 46th overall pick on an ambiguous running back who we have no guarantee that he's going to get all the touches, considering it's the last coaching staff, not even this regime, that gave him those touches. Never in my life. But yes, so Jonathan Taylor, still a player I want to buy the dip on. And since I didn't have him, much of him at all, maybe not any, honestly, even in an expanded portfolio before, now I want my exposure towards him because I believe I'm going to be getting him in the mid-third round. We're comfortable with that. I was not comfortable with his questionable upside given his role from a rookie mobile quarterback prior to this. Moving on to Kenneth Walker now. Oh, quickly, also cleaning it up. I still moved Zach Moss up our underdog rankings. So for those seeing this, if you're on the site right now, you didn't know this existed, quickly, tools, underdog rankings, and then I manually curate this CSV. You just download the rankings here. I manually update this and draft every morning to make sure we are both ahead and behind what I believe is correct in ADP. Like Bijan. No, let's see who I'm a little behind on right now, for example. So Tony Pollard. I'm 3 spots ahead of Tony Pollard ADP. So I'm telling you, if you download these rankings and put them into underdog, and I would suggest doing it every morning, every other morning now, because I'm basically updating it every day with all the pertinent news coming out. But I'm telling you, hey, we should still be ahead of Tony Pollard. That's okay. Like, I still want Tony Pollard over Jalen Waddle. We still have Chris Olave in this tier with Garrett Wilson behind Devontae Adams. And it's all based on ADP. So my rankings honestly don't matter because we're not talking about rankings when we're drafting. We're talking about ADP and how to utilize those rankings with ADP. So that's where it is right now. Getting back to Zach Moss, though, broken arm, because that's the player who was supposed to rise, out 6 weeks. Remember, we have 7 weeks into the football season. That's a long time. So I'm actually not worrying about Zach Moss. I still think if Jonathan Taylor's holding out for an extended amount of time or held out with a back injury for an extended amount of time, Zach Moss, not Deion Jackson, is the play. And with 6 weeks timeline and 7 weeks to heal, I think we should still be taking advantage of Zach Moss. So I have Zach Moss around 200 ADP, a last round player. And you should not be worried about the broken arm since there's more than enough time to heal. Keep drafting Zach Moss as a last round player for 5 or 6 running back builds, just in case Jonathan Taylor is traded for a 3rd round pick. I don't know where I'd put him, but just in case he is traded. Now, let's get to Kenneth Walker, because Zach Charbonnet is a super prospect. And I did not agree with Kenneth Walker's ADP, even in half PPR leagues like Underdog, to this point. I thought he was appropriately a dead zone back that I wanted to be underweight on, given that he has no pass catching equity. And Charbonnet is not only a better pass catcher to play that 3rd down role over Walker, but was one of the best receiving backs in the nation. We all talk about how Jahmyr Gibbs is a special receiving back. Charbonnet under Chip Kelly last year actually averaged more catches per game, 4.1, than Gibbs did at Alabama, 3.6. Charbonnet, also a 5-star prospect, was also Jim Harbaugh's highest recruited prospect on offense and a workhorse at UCLA in his final year. Only left Michigan and Harbaugh because he got thrown into a committee unexpectedly. So Charbonnet is a player I was wanting to draft around that 100 to 115 range quite often. But now we saw the most recent report. And then we start sifting through the words and we can actually start targeting the Seattle running backs accordingly. Because if you look at these quotes carefully, and this is where I think a lot of people are getting misconstrued. This is the report on Kenneth Walker. He's got a little groin thing that has kind of bothered him going into camp. We're just keeping him quiet for the day. Because it's a groin issue, we have to make sure. He doesn't feel bad. It's not a terrible injury, but we just don't want to aggravate it now and make it something that lingers through camp. Maybe that's Pete Carroll wearing rose-colored glasses, but to me, that doesn't sound serious at all. That sounds like a team who understands they don't want to aggravate a nuisance injury. And so they're just taking it slow because we have 7 weeks until the season. Whereas Charbonnet's is a little bit scarier, if only because it's mysterious. We'll have to take some time to figure it out. We would love to have those guys back out there, but they're not ready to go. He'll be back in with the doctors, getting some stuff looked at. Also, the term, I don't think it's said in this report right here, but the term that Carroll used for Charbonnet was out indefinitely. Out indefinitely is scary, no matter what we think about the situation. And so what that tells me now is that if Charbonnet is out indefinitely, and we are not worried about Walker, who is precautionarily out, I don't know if precautionarily is a word, but we're going to go with it, then we need to get higher on Walker. Well, everyone else dips on Walker. We might be getting a few weeks. We might be getting a couple months. We don't know. We have no idea. We might be getting nothing. But at least right now, if we're deciphering the words correctly, Walker shouldn't budge from a 50-52 ADP. That's, in my opinion, where he was being overdrafted. But now we can get him for cheap at that same exact spot because we're not worried about his injury, but we are worried about Charbonnet, or at least we don't know with Charbonnet. So now's the time to draft Walker. Thus, I moved Walker up my rankings because I absolutely want to be ahead of him. That's how I'm handling the Seahawks backfield with Kenny McIntosh just being the last round pick. I don't think Kenny McIntosh actually matters. I don't even think was a good prospect. But if both are going to miss whatever amount of time, we've made worse last round picks than Kenny McIntosh. Just remember, it's different conversation and redraft from best ball, because best ball, all your players have to be usable. Redraft, you can cut these guys. If Justin Ross doesn't work out in the last round, you can cut him. If Dwayne McBride doesn't work out in the last round, get rid of him. But if you take Kenny McIntosh in best ball, you better hope he not only makes the roster, but he plays or he gets at least a couple touches. And if Charbonnet and Walker are healthy, there's no path for Kenny McIntosh whatsoever. So last round pick, that's fine, but just be wary about the injury situation. We have already talked about the Chiefs wide receivers in the past, how we were playing a game and you shouldn't play the game by drafting Kadarius Toney, because the rest of the rooms were saying, I'm confident in an ambiguous situation with a 70 ADP. And that's not how you play fantasy football. You understand the ambiguity of the situation, and then you let the game come to you with a Sky Moore at 100 ADP, with the Richie James at a 170 ADP, with the Justin Ross at 180, with a Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who's basically guaranteed to be on the field in 2 wide sets at 155. That's how you play the game. You don't bet on Kadarius Toney with a 70 ADP. So we've already talked about how we should be higher than Sky Moore, and we're seeing their ADPs flip now, which is what we expected. Sky Moore slowly rising up to around 90, Kadarius Toney backing off. I still want to keep drafting Sky Moore, but there will come a time where he gets to Kadarius Toney's range, and that's when we back off. Whereas there will come a time, because best ball's stupid, and all we do is, like stocks, take dips and perhaps buy high if we're confident in the situation. But a lot of this just really comes down to the game coming to us. There will come a time where Kadarius Toney is past 100. And when that's the case, I probably will be getting my stocks of Toney. I think I've drafted him a couple times in bingo stacks right now, just to make sure I didn't go into the season without any Toney shares. But obviously a much more comfortable situation whenever he gets past 100. So keep drafting Sky Moore where he's at right now. Be careful, because it's going to keep rising. Wait for Toney to drop further and then attack that. Tim Patrick's injury yesterday sucked. Fucking sucked. I'm on the cold brew diet right now, by the way. And I need to, not diet, I'm just drinking a lot of cold brew. And I need to figure out Peter Overzet's cold brew morning. Where does he get his concentrate from? If you have good concentrate, let me know, because I think I need to know how to make cold brew outside of cold brew pour overs. Anyways, though, we're not here for that. There you go. Fantasy Football Garage got it right. With the Tim Patrick injury, it sucks. It's unfortunate. But because of my job, we know the fallout. We know what happens next. I questioned Tim Patrick's role in the offense anyways. I wasn't sure the first year after a serious injury under a new head coach how much he was going to play, honestly. It was a wide open target tree, especially because the Broncos already tried to trade Cortland Sutton. Nobody wanted him for his asking price. They tried to trade Jerry Jeudy. Nobody wanted him. Thus, the Broncos had to give in and give him the next year of his rookie deal. Just had to pay it up to keep him for cheap. But we know Sean Payton reached for Marvin Mims on draft day. And that's who we now get much higher on. In my most recent underdog rankings, as I showed you earlier, we moved Marvin Mims up, currently with a 165 ADP, roughly to 130, 140 range. Because now there's really nothing stopping him from playing. Marquez Callaway, who I know it's crazy to say Marquez Callaway's name. A lot of you probably didn't even realize that, of course, Sean Payton went out to get his boy Marquez Callaway in free agency. But Marquez Callaway did pop for a few top 36 wide receiver 3 games the last time he played under Sean Payton. So I think Marquez Callaway becomes like a last round pick. That's fine. But more importantly, Marvin Mims becomes a lot more fun. Don't look at Marvin Mims' career under Lincoln Riley, because for as special of an offensive play caller, and this is correct, Adam, Blake, we should get a lot higher on Greg Dulcich. In fact, I moved Greg Dulcich up a tier as well. I was about to get to that, but since you're talking about it already, I moved Greg Dulcich ahead of Dalton Kincaid and Dalton Schultz. Maybe I should have been ahead on him right there anyways. I don't know, because I thought it was a wide open target tree. That's up for debate. He was in the same tier as those guys. But I actually moved Dulcich up to the Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Pat Freiermuth, Dulcich tier now. And honestly, I probably put Dulcich around Pat Freiermuth. I want to put Pat Freiermuth ahead of Kyle Pitts. I really do. I haven't had the courage to do it yet, but I actually think Pat Freiermuth is a safer pick than Kyle Pitts. And he goes 4 rounds later. That's the crazy part. All these high stakes drafts, I'm going to be overweight on Pat Freiermuth, tight end premium leagues, because to get him in the 10th or 11th round to me is insanity. But yes, Dulcich now part of the Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Freiermuth tier. So around tight end 10, tight end 11. For Marvin Mims, though, remember, he was mistreated by Lincoln Riley, because as genius as Lincoln Riley is as a play caller, he's not playing for these guys to get to the NFL. He's playing to make his offense a success. And so basically everyone is inappropriately used under Lincoln Riley. He doesn't care about your numbers. He cares about making sure his offense runs intact. So Marvin Mims was a rotational player through 2021. But his last year, whenever Lincoln Riley left to UFC, Mims was left over at Oklahoma, and that was the first time Marvin Mims was a full-time player, popped 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. Also, 19.5 yards per catch, and 95% of his career touchdowns. Think about this. 95% of his career touchdowns came on targets 20 yards downfield. He's a walking splash play waiting to happen with one of the better deep ball throwers of the past decade and Russell Wilson, outside of the one time he played with Nathaniel Hackett. Outside of the Nathaniel Hackett year, Russell Wilson's deep ball was just fine. And so, yes, we are getting higher on Marvin Mims, where you have to push Marvin Mims up a tier. But to your point, Adam, Blake, everyone else, yes, we are also pushing Greg Dulcich up a tier as well, especially because when we get to that range, Dalton Kincaid, Dalton Schultz, Gerald Everett, when we talk about guys being the same, that's the tier. That's the range where everyone is the same player. So we just have to be pertinent of both those situations. And then finally, wow, I didn't even realize we've been here for 35 minutes talking fantasy football. That's crazy. Okay. Not that we're in a hurry, but I just wanted to make sure you were all up to date on how I am adjusting my rankings on the site for everyone to walk you through the process. And then finally, it's just incorrect. It's just been wrong that everyone's taking Tyquan Thornton over Devontae Parker. This is not hyperbole. I don't even know if Tyquan Thornton's the third wide receiver on the team, let alone the second. I don't know if Tyquan Thornton can play in 2 wide receiver sets, to be honest. Devontae Parker ran more routes from 12 personnel being counted backwards from the backfield, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. And when you have two tight ends on the field, thus, unless it's 22, unless you have a fullback on the field, 2 tight ends usually leads to 2 wide receivers. That's all you have room for in your personnel. So 12 personnel, 2 wide receivers. I don't know if Tyquan Thornton can play in 12 personnel. I have no idea. Devontae Parker ran more routes from 12 personnel last year. And remember, think about the deal that Juju Smith-Schuster got from the Patriots in free agency with $16 million guaranteed. This most recent extension, even if it's incentive laden and the Patriots can get out of it in the next couple of years, the fact is they gave Devontae Parker $14 million guaranteed, nearly as much as they gave Juju Smith-Schuster. And by all accounts out of camp right now, the only players guaranteed roles. This is the report. Let me find this really quick so I can credit him, because per the reports, the only players guaranteed roles in this new Bill O'Brien offense are Andre Stevenson, Devontae Parker, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Hunter Henry. We've talked about Hunter Henry on this show before. I cannot get over the fact that I can get Hunter Henry in the last round every single draft. He's going to be one of my, he might be, just because of ADP and how tight ends work, he might be my highest rostered tight end this year. Here is Jared Smola, of course, the great Jared Smola of Draft Sharks. And this is the report per the Boston Herald. 4 catchers guaranteed their roles. Hunter Henry, remember, was just 2 seasons ago. We are only 1 year removed from Hunter Henry being the tight end 13 in points per game with a career high 9 touchdowns. We knew we knew that he would regress because those 9 touchdowns came on a stretch of only 40 receptions from week 4 on 2 years ago. So we knew he would regress. We knew we shouldn't be drafting him last year. We knew that. But now he's being double discounted because of the results that we figured, that we went through the process and understood were likely to come last year. But even then, if you pull back the curtain, the process we wanted was still right, because Hunter Henry quietly led the Patriots last year in red zone targets, tied with Jacoby Myers, who is obviously no longer on the team. And so we want to go right back to Hunter Henry in the last rounds. And that's why I still think you can get Gabriel Davis, Stephon Diggs, and Dawson Knox is the last round. Dawson Knox, of course, who is basically guaranteed to be on the field in line, since Dalton Kincaid is not a tight end. He's a slot wide receiver. Dalton Kincaid is more of a detriment to Khalil Shakir than he is to Dawson Knox. Knox, of course, who is second among all tight ends the last 2 seasons in end zone targets, only behind Mark Andrews. So Dawson Knox is a high upside touchdown or bust player as well. But Hunter Henry, Mac Jones, and Devontae Parker all are being taken 16th through 18th. And so that's kind of why not only do you want Bills exposure, that's easy to say, but that's also why the Bills are fun, because then in best ball drafts, you just wrap back around and you're like, I can get my week 17, I can get my stack exposure, I can get a double stack at round 16 through 18 with players I'm high on that no one else wants. Like that's the fun part about of best ball drafts, is when the process shows us we should be higher on players and no one sees that process. Not no one. There are a lot of sharp people who are betting on the Patriots. And maybe it's dumb to bet on the Patriots. Who knows? I could be wrong. But at least the data is saying round 16 through 18, these guys we should be betting on for sure. Mac Jones included. So that's why also, I'll get the cock enthused comment off the screen now. That's why also the Patriots are fun to draft. And Blake, to wrap this up, yes. Demario Douglas is apparently showing off in OTAs right now. But remember, he's strictly a slot receiver. So will he play over Tyquan Thornton from the slot is the real question. And what will happen in 3 wide sets? Because if Juju Smith-Schuster, a career slot player, moves to the slot, that takes Demario Douglas off the field and maybe puts Tyquan Thornton there instead. I don't think that would be Kendrick Bourne. So how they use Demario Douglas in 3 wide sets is the real question. Because if they are allowing him to play in the slot over Juju Smith-Schuster, if Demario Douglas is a real thing, and by all accounts in camp right now, he is doing really well. He's at least earning a spot on the roster. If that's the case, then you can't put Tyquan Thornton on the field. He doesn't fit on the field because they're not playing him over Juju Smith-Schuster and Devontae Parker. So that's certainly something to watch out for. And with preseason DFS right around the corner, like Thursday, by the way, Thursday. If you are a 4 subscriber, get in the Discord. We're passing along news there. Then Demario Douglas, someone to keep in mind for preseason fantasy football. And yes, historical. For those listening, I will be at the Fantasy Football Expo. If you see me, call me out. I will buy you a drink. I made this promise before the Scott Fish Bowl live in Chicago, and someone did call me out. And then I went to buy him a drink. Someone who I already shouted out on a previous show, Morton Saltboy, who is a big fan of Chicago pizza, who actually I wrote down a lot of restaurants because he's a local kid. I shouldn't say kid. He's a local man who's a friend now. But he actually did call me out. And so I went to buy him a drink. But he then, when I came back, had a bucket of Modelo sitting in front of him. So I was like, you just let me know when the perfect time to buy you a drink is. And that time never came, unfortunately. So I do owe him a drink. But anyways, if you see me at the expo, I'll be there. Right now, it's looking like I'll be there Friday through Sunday. So if you see me, and you will see me walking around the hotel downtown at the diner until 2 a.m., because they have burgers at the diner until 2 a.m., and around the Pro Football Hall of Fame, please shout me out. Come say hi. Come hug me. And drinks on me. Anyways, we've wrapped up our rankings for today. Remember, we are running a lot on the site right now for completely free, including Paulson's 99 Stats article, if you'd like to check that out. And my team previews began running yesterday. The first one, if you want to check out my thoughts on TJ Hawkinson, what I think about the Vikings win total, and more importantly, Alexander Mattison, because again, I think the rhetoric around Alexander Mattison is odd compared to the public consensus. And so I go in depth to it here. But if you want to check that out, again, this first team preview, all for free to read. All my opinions here on every player, including, if you want to know how deep we go in these, here's a Jaron Hall reference. If you want to know how deep we go, I'm even talking about 16-team Superflex leagues just in case you play them. So that's how deep we go in the team previews with hard opinions on every player to make sure that you know my stance on those players, including why T.J. Hawkinson is also one of the easiest fades at his current cost, at least in half PPR leagues. So anyways, on the site for free, go check everything out. We will be back tomorrow, the Most Accurate Podcast, live at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Until then, you know what to do. Be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.